The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. As Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into the high-security briefing at Los Alamos National Laboratory, her meticulous safety protocols had earned her the nickname La Cautelosa, the cautious one, among her colleagues, most of whom were watching her now with barely concealed disdain. What they didn't know was that Elena's methodical approach would soon be all that stood between them and catastrophe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the reinforced windows of Los Alamos National Laboratory's Building 16, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the briefing room. Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her security badge, the laminated card bearing her credentials as the facility's new head of nuclear safety protocols, a position that, despite her impeccable qualifications, had made her an unwelcome addition to the team of veteran weapons engineers. She smoothed down the front of her lab coat and took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the resistance she knew was coming. The badge, unlike her reputation, was still pristine, not yet worn down by the constant friction of working among people who viewed safety precautions as bureaucratic obstacles rather than essential safeguards. Elena paused by the entrance to the conference room, observing the team already gathered inside. Her reflection in the glass door showed a woman in her mid-30s with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. 3 months into this posting, and she still felt like an outsider, the unwanted conscience of a department that prided itself on pushing boundaries. "Dr. Vasquez, nice of you to join us," called out Dr. Marcus Reynolds, the project's technical director, as she entered. His voice carried that particular tone of false cordiality that made Elena's spine stiffen. "We were just discussing the accelerated timeline for Project Hermes." The room was filled with the department's senior engineers and physicists, men and women who had spent decades working with nuclear materials. Their expertise was unquestionable, but their attitudes towards safety protocols had grown dangerously casual over years of routine exposure to hazardous materials. "I hope that accelerated timeline includes all the mandatory safety reviews," Elena replied, taking the only empty seat at the large conference table. She pulled out her tablet and opened her notes from the previous inspection. "The preliminary assessment flagged several areas of concern that need to be addressed before we proceed to the next phase." Dr. Reynolds exchanged glances with Dr. Carlos Mendoza, his deputy director, who rolled his eyes dramatically enough for everyone to notice. "Of course, Dr. Vasquez," Reynolds said with exaggerated patience. "We wouldn't dream of bypassing your extensive checklists." The laughter that rippled through the room was soft, but unmistakable. Elena felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. She'd learned early in her career that showing emotional reactions only gave ammunition to those who already underestimated her. Instead, she pulled up the detailed safety report she'd compiled and projected it onto the main screen. "These aren't arbitrary requirements," she said, her voice steady and professional. "These are established protocols based on decades of nuclear handling experience and incidents, some of which occurred in this very facility." Carlos Mendoza leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of his 25 years at Los Alamos. "With all due respect, Dr. Vasquez, some of us were handling nuclear materials while you were still in elementary school. We've developed a certain intuition about these things that goes beyond checklists." "Intuition doesn't detect radiation leaks or prevent contamination," Elena countered. "Data does. Procedures do. Rigorous adherence to safety protocols does." "What Dr. Mendoza means," interjected Dr. Sophia Chen, one of the senior physicists, "is that we understand the theoretical risks, but we also understand the practical realities of this work. Your approach adds weeks to projects that are already under intense deadline pressure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Elena looked around the room, noting the nodding heads and crossed arms. These were brilliant minds, some of the best in their fields, but they had fallen into the most dangerous trap in high-risk professions, the belief that familiarity negated danger. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask, was that Elena Vasquez hadn't started her career in safety oversight. 5 years ago, she'd been Dr. Vasquez, nuclear weapons specialist, ranking second in her class at MIT's nuclear science program. She'd published groundbreaking research on degradation patterns in aging nuclear warheads, mastered remote handling techniques that had become standard in 3 countries, and earned commendations for her innovative approach to nuclear materials storage. Her career had been on a meteoric trajectory until the incident that changed everything. It happened during a routine inspection at a storage facility in Nevada. Elena had noticed anomalies in the radiation readings from a particular section of the warehouse, subtle fluctuations that her supervisor, Dr. Harrison Wells, dismissed as sensor malfunctions. But Elena had documented every deviation, cross-referenced the maintenance logs, and insisted on a comprehensive review of the storage protocols. Dr. Wells had not appreciated being questioned by a junior team member, especially one whose methodical approach he considered excessively cautious. When Elena filed an official report citing potential containment failures, Wells accused her of overreaction and wasting valuable resources on what he called phantom concerns. 2 weeks later, during a standard inventory check, a containment vessel failed catastrophically. 3 technicians were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. They survived, but their careers in nuclear handling were over, their health permanently compromised. Elena had been right. The investigation proved it. But Dr. Wells was a decorated veteran of the nuclear program, with connections throughout the defense establishment. When the dust settled, Elena found herself reassigned to, quote, better leverage her observational skills and attention to detail, bureaucratic speak for being shuffled off to safety oversight. Her expertise wasn't discounted outright, but it was redirected away from the cutting-edge research she had trained for and toward a role that most of her former colleagues viewed as peripheral. Important in theory, but a hindrance in practice. Now, as Reynolds' team's laughter faded into the morning's agenda, Elena made her way through her safety presentation. The small conference room felt stifling, the air conditioning struggling against the New Mexico heat and the collective resistance to her message. These radiation shielding standards have been revised based on the latest research, she explained, highlighting a section of her report. The current setup in Lab 7 doesn't meet the new requirements. We need to upgrade before proceeding with the next phase of testing. Dr. Reynolds sighed dramatically. Those revisions were just published, Elena. Do you have any idea what kind of delay we're looking at to implement these changes? The Department of Defense is expecting preliminary results next month. I'm aware of the timeline, Elena replied calmly. That's why I've already drafted an implementation plan that minimizes disruption. If we start tomorrow, we can have the lab reconfigured within 7 days. 7 days! Carlos exclaimed. That's a week of lost research time. Elena met his gaze steadily. It's also the difference between acceptable and unacceptable radiation exposure for your team. I didn't create these standards, Dr. Mendoza. I'm just ensuring we meet them. The rest of the meeting proceeded in much the same way. Elena identifying safety concerns, the team pushing back, and compromises reluctantly reached. By the time they adjourned, Elena had secured agreements for the most critical upgrades, though not without conceding on some timeline extensions she would have preferred. As she gathered her materials, she overheard Reynolds speaking to Chen and Mendoza by the door. La Cautelosa strikes again, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. At this rate, we'll deliver Project Hermes in time for my retirement party. Maybe we should strap a Geiger counter to her clipboard, Carlos added with a smirk. She could perform emergency evacuations when it clicks too fast. The group erupted in laughter, the sound bouncing off the conference room walls. Elena felt the familiar weight of isolation settle over her. She checked her tablet one more time and continued packing her notes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. What Reynolds and the others didn't understand was that Elena Vasquez hadn't chosen this role. She'd become a safety officer not by preference but by consequence of being right when others refused to listen. She was qualified to handle nuclear materials at the highest level, trained to innovate in weapons systems, but relegated to enforcing rules others found inconvenient. Now, as their laughter followed her down the hallway, Elena made her way to her office. The small room was positioned between 2 larger laboratories, its utilitarian furnishings a stark contrast to the state-of-the-art equipment that surrounded it on all sides. Her domain was paperwork and regulations, not the cutting-edge research happening just beyond her walls. She began updating her inspection logs, her hands moving with practiced efficiency while her mind wandered to the simulation software she accessed after hours. The old terminal in the back of Lab 3 wasn't much to look at. Outdated interface, slow processing speed, but it still ran the nuclear degradation model she had helped develop before her reassignment. Night after night, Elena worked on refining those models, tracking decay patterns, and predicting failure points in aging weapon systems. She documented everything meticulously, building a body of research that no one had assigned her, but which she knew was crucial to understanding the weapons they were all working to secure. Miguel Herrera, a veteran technician with 30 years at the facility, had watched her through the lab window one evening. "She works like a weapons specialist," he told his colleague quietly. "Her analytical approach is textbook perfect. Most safety officers just run through their checklists without understanding the underlying physics. She understands everything she's looking at." But having the knowledge and having the opportunity to apply it were two entirely different things. As Elena finished her morning reports, the facility's intercom system announced the day's security protocols and special access authorizations. Reynolds' name was called for high-level testing. Chen for radiation exposure work. A dozen other specialists received their assignments, their voices confident as they acknowledged their clearances. Elena's name was not called. It never was, not for the work she had trained to do. She looked out through her office's small window at the research wing, where the specialized handling equipment sat like sleeping giants, their potential waiting for the right hands to guide them. The morning light caught the radiation warning symbols on the heavy doors, the yellow and black trefoils marking boundaries between safety and danger. Somewhere in the distance she could hear Reynolds' voice carrying down the corridor. "And that's how you handle these materials efficiently. Not by triple-checking every reading and jumping at shadows." Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The faint smell of industrial cleaning products drifted through the ventilation system, mixing with the sterile scent of her small domain. She'd been sidelined for 5 years now, her expertise acknowledged in theory but never in practice. But she was still here, still vigilant, still believing that one day meticulousness would matter more than expediency. That day was coming sooner than anyone imagined. The midday heat had turned the facility's exterior into a shimmering mirage as Elena completed her afternoon inspection rounds. The weather in Los Alamos had been extreme lately. Record-high temperatures and unusually low humidity creating challenging conditions for the climate-sensitive equipment throughout the complex. She was documenting temperature variations in the storage facilities when the first anomaly appeared on her monitoring tablet. A subtle fluctuation in the radiation readings from Vault 16, the secure storage area housing decommissioned warheads awaiting disassembly. The variation was small, barely outside the acceptable range, but it was persistent. Protocol required her to report it immediately. But experience had taught Elena to gather more data before approaching Reynolds with what he would undoubtedly dismiss as another of her phantom concerns. She recalibrated her equipment and ran a second scan. The readings remained elevated. Within the hour, she had compiled enough data to justify a formal investigation. The radiation levels weren't immediately dangerous, but the pattern suggested something was changing inside one of the secure containers. Something that shouldn't be changing at all. Elena made her way to the main laboratory, where Reynolds and his team were conducting tests on components for Project Hermes. She waited patiently by the door until there was a natural break in their work, then approached with her tablet displaying the concerning data. "Dr. Reynolds, I need to discuss some anomalous readings from Vault 16, she said, keeping her voice professional and calm. Reynolds barely looked up from his work. "Can it wait, Vasquez? We're in the middle of something important here." "I wouldn't interrupt if it wasn't significant," Elena persisted. "I'm seeing elevated radiation levels from container series W88. The pattern suggests potential degradation of the containment system." Now Reynolds did look up, irritation clear on his face. "Those containers were certified last year. The readings are probably just background variation." "I've already accounted for background radiation," Elena explained, showing him the data. "These deviations are consistent and increasing. I'd like authorization to perform a direct inspection of the container." Carlos Mendoza joined them, peering at Elena's tablet with skeptical eyes. "Those variations are minuscule, Elena. Well within any reasonable safety margin." "They're small but persistent," she countered. "And they've increased 3% since I first detected them this morning. That suggests a progressive problem, not a static one." Reynolds sighed heavily. "Do you have any idea what's involved in opening one of those containers for inspection?" The paperwork alone would take days, not to mention the security protocols and the disruption to our current work. I'm aware of the procedures, Elena said, struggling to keep the frustration from her voice. But if something is compromising the containment integrity of decommissioned nuclear material, then we'll address it when there's actual evidence of a problem, Reynolds interrupted, not based on readings that barely register above the baseline. Elena tried again. Sir, with respect, early intervention is precisely how we prevent major incidents. By the time these readings reach levels you consider significant, we could be dealing with a much more serious situation. Noted, Dr. Vasquez, Reynolds said dismissively. File your report, and we'll review it during next week's safety committee meeting. In the meantime, we have actual work to complete. The implication was clear. Her concerns didn't constitute actual work in Reynolds' estimation. Elena felt her professional opinion being dismissed yet again. But she nodded stiffly and returned to her office to document her findings in painstaking detail. As she compiled her report, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was genuinely wrong. The pattern of radiation fluctuation matched degradation models she had studied extensively, slow but accelerating changes that typically preceded containment failures. Elena decided to go beyond the standard reporting requirements. She pulled up the detailed specifications for the W88 container series, cross-referenced them with the storage conditions in Vault 16, and ran a simulation of potential degradation scenarios based on the current readings. The results were concerning. If her models were correct, and her models were rarely wrong, they were looking at potential containment compromise within 72 hours, not the weeks or months that Reynolds seemed to assume they had. She had just finished her analysis when the facility-wide alarm system activated, its harsh blare cutting through the afternoon quiet. The automated voice that followed sent a chill down Elena's spine. Attention all personnel. Security breach detected in Sector 7. This is not a drill. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Security teams to Sector 7. Elena froze. Sector 7 housed the primary research laboratories, including the one where Reynolds and his team were working on Project Hermes. It was also directly adjacent to Vault 16, where she had detected the anomalous readings. Without hesitation, she grabbed her radiation detection equipment and emergency protocols tablet. Whether Reynolds considered her concerns valid or not, she knew more about the potential radiation risks in that section than anyone else in the facility. If there was a security breach near those containers, her expertise would be needed. The corridors were already filling with personnel moving quickly toward designated evacuation points. Elena moved against the flow, her security badge giving her clearance to access areas others were leaving. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as she made her way towards Sector 7. As she approached the security checkpoint, she could hear raised voices and the crackle of radio communications. A group of armed security officers was establishing a perimeter, while facility managers huddled around monitoring equipment. Dr. Reynolds was among them, his face pale as he studied a video feed. When he spotted Elena, his usual dismissive expression was replaced by something she had never seen from him before: uncertainty. Vasquez, he called, gesturing her over. We have a situation. On the monitor, Elena could see the interior of Vault 16. The heavy security door stood open, an impossibility under normal protocols, and inside, a figure in standard lab attire was removing one of the specialized containers from its storage rack. The container bore the exact identification code she had been monitoring, W8842. How did they get access? She asked, immediately focusing on the practical aspects of the breach. Used Dr. Chen's credentials somehow, one of the security officers replied. The system logged her entry, but she's been in a meeting across campus for the past hour. Do we know who it is? Elena asked, studying the grainy footage. Former employee, Reynolds said grimly. Dr. James Morrison. Specialized in warhead decommissioning until he was terminated last year for increasingly erratic behavior. Apparently, he's been planning this for months. What exactly is he planning? Elena asked, though she was already forming a terrifying hypothesis based on what she was seeing. Reynolds' voice dropped. He's threatening to compromise the containment vessel deliberately if his demands aren't met. Claims he can trigger a radiation release that would contaminate half the facility. Elena felt her blood run cold. That container is already showing signs of instability. I tried to tell you earlier. I know. Reynolds cut her off, and for once there was no condescension in his tone. Your report just came through to my tablet. The simulation you ran. If you're right about the degradation timeline, then Morrison may not need to do anything to trigger a release. Elena finished for him. The container could be approaching failure on its own. The security chief joined their conversation. We've evacuated all non-essential personnel and sealed off the surrounding sectors. Negotiators are attempting contact, but Morrison is demanding to speak with someone who understands exactly what he's holding. He says only then will we appreciate the seriousness of his threat. He wants to speak with a weapons specialist, Reynolds said, looking at Elena with new eyes. Someone who knows precisely what's in that container and what happens if containment is breached. I need to go in, Elena said immediately, already calculating the risks in her mind. Absolutely not, the security chief objected. This is a hostage negotiation situation. We have trained personnel for this. With respect, Elena replied, your negotiators don't understand nuclear containment physics or the specific degradation patterns of that particular container. I do. And if my readings from this morning are correct, we don't have time for standard negotiation protocols. She turned to Reynolds. You've spent 3 years dismissing my caution as excessive, but right now, that caution and the knowledge behind it might be the only thing that prevents a catastrophic radiation release. Reynolds studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She's right. Dr. Vasquez is uniquely qualified for this situation. He turned to the security chief. Give her whatever she needs. For the first time since her reassignment, Elena felt her expertise being recognized for what it was. Not a bureaucratic obstacle, but a crucial specialized knowledge that could mean the difference between safety and disaster. As the security team briefed her on approach protocols and communication systems, Elena's mind was already running through containment scenarios and stabilization techniques. She wasn't just a safety officer enforcing rules anymore. She was exactly what she had trained to be, a nuclear specialist facing a crisis that only her particular skills could address. The true test was just beginning. The secure corridor leading to Vault 16 felt like a tunnel into another world as Elena adjusted the radiation detection equipment strapped to her wrist. The red emergency lights cast long shadows, and the evacuation had left an eerie silence broken only by the distant sound of security teams establishing a perimeter. She checked her communications earpiece one final time and received the go-ahead from the command center. Remember, your primary objective is to assess the container's condition and establish dialogue. The security chief's voice crackled in her ear. Do not attempt to neutralize the subject. That's our job. Understood, Elena replied, though her focus was already narrowing to the physics problem ahead. If her readings were correct, the W-8842 container was degrading from within, a situation potentially more dangerous than Morrison's threats. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The final security door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the antechamber to Vault 16. Elena took a deep breath and stepped through, her footsteps echoing in the sterile space. Through the reinforced glass partition, she could see Morrison inside the main vault, hovering over the open storage rack where the W-88 containers were housed. He had one container, her container, on a portable examination table, its security seals already broken. Dr. Morrison, she called through the intercom, keeping her voice steady. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, nuclear safety specialist. I understand you wanted to speak with someone who knows what you're handling. Morrison turned, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. He was a thin man in his 50s, with disheveled gray hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time in windowless laboratories. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. They sent the safety officer? He said with a bitter laugh. How appropriate. Have you come to cite me for protocol violations, Dr. Vasquez? Elena remained calm, focusing on building rapport while gathering critical visual data on the container's condition. I'm here because I understand what's in that container, James. And I detected anomalies in its radiation signature this morning, before you removed it from storage. This caught his attention. What kind of anomalies? Increasing emission patterns consistent with internal degradation of the shielding components, she replied, deliberately using technical language to establish her credibility. The container may be compromised regardless of your actions today. Morrison's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. That's impossible. These containers are certified for 50 years of secure storage. Under ideal conditions, yes, Elena agreed, taking a careful step closer to the partition. But conditions haven't been ideal. The climate control fluctuations during the last power outage, combined with the record heat we've been experiencing, the internal temperature would have exceeded design parameters repeatedly. Her mind raced, evaluating multiple approaches. Should she emphasize the danger to gain his cooperation? Or would that escalate his panic and lead to rash actions? She chose transparent expertise over manipulation. Dr. Morrison, I need to get a closer look at that container. My readings this morning showed a progressive deterioration pattern. If that's accurate, we have a shared problem that goes beyond whatever brought you here today. Morrison studied her for a long moment. They told you who I am? Former specialist in warhead decommissioning, Elena replied. You worked here until last year. Did they tell you why I was terminated? They said your behavior became erratic. Morrison's laugh was hollow. That's one way of putting it. I raised concerns about storage protocols for these materials, warned about exactly the kind of degradation you're describing, but Reynolds and his team decided I was being paranoid, that I was seeing dangers that didn't exist. His voice took on a bitter edge. Sound familiar, Dr. Vasquez? I've heard they call you La Cautelosa now. The parallel wasn't lost on Elena. If you're right about the storage protocols, then help me address the immediate problem. Let me in to check the container. Why should I trust you? You're one of them. Elena shook her head. No, I'm not. For 3 years, I've been fighting the same battle you describe, insisting on protocols that others find inconvenient, identifying risks that get dismissed as excessive caution. She met his gaze directly. The difference is, I stayed to fight from within the system. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something in her words reached him. Morrison's shoulders sagged slightly. It's exhausting, isn't it? Being the only one who sees the danger while everyone else carries on like nothing's wrong. It is, Elena agreed, sensing an opening. But right now, we need to focus on that container. If you're right about the storage protocols, and I'm right about the readings I took this morning, we could be facing a serious containment failure. Morrison glanced down at the container, then back at Elena. His expression shifted from hostility to reluctant professional interest. What exactly did your readings show? Elena pulled out her tablet and displayed the data through the glass. 3% increase in gamma emission over a 4-hour period. The pattern suggests degradation of the internal shielding matrix rather than a breach in the outer casing. Morrison's expertise was evident as he analyzed her data. That's consistent with thermal stress damage to the boron polymer layer. He frowned. How long until projected failure? My simulation estimates 72 hours at the rate observed this morning, Elena replied. But that was before the container was removed from its temperature-controlled environment. And before I broke the security seals, Morrison added grimly. Which means our timeline may be significantly accelerated, Elena concluded. Dr. Morrison, I need to get in there and run a direct assessment. Whatever your grievances with the facility, I don't believe you came here to cause a radiation exposure event. Morrison was silent for several seconds, internal conflict evident on his face. Finally, he pressed the button to unlock the inner door. You come in alone, no security. Elena acknowledged his terms and stepped into the vault as the door sealed behind her. The air was noticeably cooler here. The specialized environment designed to preserve the integrity of materials that remained dangerous for millennia. The soft hum of monitoring equipment provided a backdrop to the tension between them. The container sat on the examination table between them, a cylinder roughly the size of a large suitcase, its dark gray exterior marked with warning symbols and security identifiers. With the outer seals broken, Elena could see the secondary containment layer beneath, the critical barrier between them and materials that could deliver a lethal radiation dose in minutes. What were you planning to do? Elena asked quietly as she set up her monitoring equipment. Morrison's hands shook slightly. Make them listen. Force Reynolds and the others to acknowledge the corners they've been cutting. I was going to demonstrate exactly what happens when you ignore safety protocols for long enough. By exposing yourself to lethal radiation? Elena asked, keeping her voice free of judgment. If necessary, he replied. They buried my reports, discredited my concerns, and pushed me out. Sometimes the only way to make people see danger is to show them the consequences. Elena understood his desperation all too well. How many times had she considered walking away from Los Alamos, frustrated by the constant dismissal of concerns she knew were valid? But she'd persisted, believing that presence was prerequisite to influence. "Let's focus on the container," she said, activating her specialized detection equipment. The readings confirmed her fears. The radiation levels were increasing faster than her morning projections had estimated. The deterioration is accelerating. Breaking the outer seals changed the thermal dynamics. Morrison leaned in to examine her readings, professional instinct temporarily overriding his other motivations. The secondary containment is failing. See this pattern? It's the boron polymer matrix breaking down under thermal stress. They were now united by a shared technical challenge, their expertise complementing each other as they assessed the rapidly evolving situation. "We need to stabilize it," Elena said, already calculating what would be required. "The emergency containment kit in the vault should have thermal regulators and sealant matrix." "That won't be enough," Morrison countered. "Not if the internal shielding is already compromised. We'd need to create a complete secondary containment envelope." Elena's mind raced through possibilities. What about a staged recontainment? Use the thermal regulators to slow the degradation while we prepare a more comprehensive solution. That could work, Morrison agreed, already moving toward the emergency equipment cabinet. Quote, "But we'd need specialized materials from the main lab." "I can get them brought here," Elena offered, then hesitated. "But I need to know your intentions, Dr. Morrison. Are we solving this problem together? Or do you still have other plans?" Morrison paused, conflict evident in his expression. "They need to understand what's been happening with these storage protocols. People need to be held accountable. And they will be," Elena assured him. "My morning readings and this incident will trigger a full investigation. But first, we need to prevent an exposure event that would harm innocent people and potentially contaminate a significant portion of the facility." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Morrison's scientific training won out over his grievances. "Get what we need. I'll start the stabilization process here." Elena relayed the requirements to the command center, specifying exactly what they needed to create a temporary containment barrier. As she worked, she maintained a careful dialogue with Morrison, learning that his concerns had been nearly identical to those she'd raised since joining the safety division. "They called me paranoid," he said bitterly as they prepared the thermal regulation system. "Said I was obsessing over theoretical risks instead of focusing on the actual work." "I've heard similar things," Elena admitted, carefully connecting the cooling apparatus to the container's external housing. "Reynolds has made it clear he considers my safety protocols an inconvenient obstacle." "And yet here we are," Morrison said, "dealing with exactly the scenario I warned about. If they had listened then—" "We can't change that," Elena replied pragmatically. "But we can document everything now. Create a record so comprehensive they can't ignore it this time." As they worked, Elena could see Morrison's demeanor shifting from desperate hostage-taker to the methodical scientist he had once been. His hands steadied as he returned to familiar technical work, his breathing becoming more regular as they established the first level of containment. The requested materials arrived through a secure transfer chamber, allowing them to avoid opening the main vault doors. With each passing minute, they built a more stable environment around the degrading container, their combined expertise creating solutions neither could have devised alone. 3 hours into the crisis, they had succeeded in slowing the deterioration rate significantly. The radiation levels had stabilized, though still far above acceptable parameters. They had bought time, but the fundamental problem remained unsolved. "The inner containment seal is still deteriorating," Morrison observed, studying the latest readings. "We've delayed the failure, not prevented it." Elena nodded grimly. "We need to replace the compromised components entirely, not just add external protection." "That would require opening the secondary containment layer," Morrison pointed out. "The exposure risk would be significant," Elena finished, "but controlled and directed rather than catastrophic and widespread." Morrison looked at her with newfound respect. "You're suggesting a controlled disassembly and recontainment." That's far beyond standard safety officer protocols. I wasn't always a safety officer, Elena replied simply. Understanding dawned on Morrison's face. You were reassigned too. Put in safety because you raised concerns someone didn't want to hear. Elena didn't confirm or deny, keeping her focus on the problem at hand. The question is whether we have the equipment here to attempt a full recontainment. They inventoried the vault's resources and the additional materials that had been sent in. It was possible. Difficult and dangerous, but possible. The procedure would expose them to elevated radiation levels, even with protective gear, but would prevent the larger disaster of a complete containment failure. We should wait for the hazardous materials team, Morrison suggested, his earlier recklessness replaced by appropriate caution. They're an hour out, Elena replied, checking the updates from Command Center. Based on our current stabilization, we have perhaps 40 minutes before the secondary containment fails. We need to act now. The decision hung between them, a choice between immediate personal risk and potential facility-wide disaster. Elena could see Morrison processing the same variables she was considering, weighing expertise against danger, procedure against necessity. I'll do it, he finally said. This was my protest. I should be the one to take the risk. We'll do it together, Elena countered firmly. The procedure requires 2 specialists, and I'm qualified. This isn't about blame or martyrdom, Dr. Morrison. It's about preventing harm using the skills we have. They began methodical preparations, donning the highest-grade radiation protection available in the vault, setting up the specialized tools needed for the delicate operation, and establishing a step-by-step protocol that would minimize their exposure while maximizing effectiveness. Elena contacted the command center to explain their plan. Reynolds' voice came through the communication system, tense but no longer dismissive. Dr. Vasquez, the hazmat team insists this procedure is too risky to attempt without their specialized equipment. Their equipment will arrive too late, Elena replied calmly. Dr. Morrison and I have the expertise to perform this operation, and we've established protocols to minimize exposure. The risk to you personally is acceptable compared to the alternative, Elena interrupted. We've run the projections, sir. If the secondary containment fails completely, the radiation release would contaminate 3 sectors and potentially expose dozens of personnel who couldn't be evacuated in time. There was a lengthy pause before Reynolds responded. You're certain this is the only option? I am, Elena confirmed. And as safety officer, I'm formally recommending this course of action. Another pause. Proceed with caution, Dr. Vasquez. And thank you. The acknowledgement was unexpected but not unwelcome. Elena and Morrison exchanged glances, then began the delicate operation of creating a new containment structure around the deteriorating core. The work required perfect precision under extreme pressure. Each movement had to be economical and exact, minimizing their time in proximity to the exposed components. They worked in choreographed sequence, Elena's methodical approach complementing Morrison's specialized knowledge of the container's design. Sweat beaded on Elena's forehead inside her protective helmet as she carefully manipulated the specialized tools. The radiation meters on their suits registered climbing exposure levels, approaching but not yet exceeding emergency thresholds. Boron matrix is degraded beyond 80%, Morrison reported, his voice tense but controlled. We need to complete the transfer within the next 7 minutes to stay within safe exposure limits. Elena nodded, focusing entirely on the delicate manipulation of the specialized containment materials. Primary seal is established, beginning secondary layer application. Time seemed to compress around them as they worked, the rest of the world falling away until there was nothing but the technical challenge before them and the silent countdown of their exposure meters. When the final seal was secured and the new containment verified, both scientists stepped back, exhausted but triumphant. The readings from the reconstructed container showed stable, acceptable levels, the crisis averted through expertise, courage, and collaboration. Containment successfully established, Elena reported to the command center. Radiation levels are within safe parameters and holding steady. Relief was evident in Reynolds' voice when he responded. Excellent work, Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Morrison. Hazmat team will take over from here. Please proceed to decontamination immediately. As they followed exit protocols and moved toward the decontamination chamber, Morrison turned to Elena. They'll still try to cover this up, you know. Find ways to minimize what happened. Avoid accountability for the storage failures. Not this time, Elena replied with quiet confidence. Everything has been documented. The morning readings, the degradation pattern, the recontainment procedure. And more importantly, they can't dismiss both of us as paranoid or overcautious. Not after today. Morrison studied her carefully. You stayed when I left. Kept fighting from within the system even when they marginalized you. Was it worth it? Elena considered the question as they entered the decontamination chamber. Today it was. Sometimes being in the room, even when they don't want to listen to you, means you're there when they finally have no choice. As the decontamination process began, Elena knew the coming days would bring investigations, questions, and likely resistance from those whose negligence had contributed to the crisis. But something fundamental had shifted. She had demonstrated not just the value of her caution, but the depth of expertise behind it. The hazmat team was waiting as they emerged from decontamination, ready to escort them to medical evaluation. But before they separated, Morrison extended his hand. They should have listened to you sooner, he said simply. Elena shook his hand, recognizing the complex mixture of vindication and regret in his eyes. They're listening now. As medical personnel led them away for evaluation and debriefing, Elena caught a glimpse of Reynolds watching from the corridor, his expression unreadable but his presence significant. The crisis had forced a recognition that her caution wasn't excessive. It was essential. The real test would come in the aftermath, when systems would either change or revert to dangerous complacency. But Elena Vasquez, once dismissed as merely la Cautelosa, had demonstrated beyond any doubt that safety wasn't just about following protocols. It was about understanding exactly what happened when those protocols failed. Today, that understanding had saved lives, and no one would forget it anytime soon. The medical bay buzzed with quiet efficiency as Elena sat on the examination table, watching the radiation specialist review her exposure levels. The emergency event had concluded 6 hours ago, but the ripples of its impact were just beginning to spread through Los Alamos National Laboratory. Through the observation window, she could see Morrison undergoing similar tests in the adjacent room, security personnel stationed discreetly by his door. Your exposure was within emergency acceptable limits, Dr. Navarro informed her, reviewing the results with professional detachment. We'll need to monitor you for the next few weeks, but I don't anticipate any long-term effects. Elena nodded, relief washing over her. The specialized protective equipment had done its job, shielding them from the worst of the radiation during the critical recontainment procedure. And Dr. Morrison? Similar results, Navarro replied. Physically, he'll recover completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The unspoken implication hung in the air between them. Morrison's physical health might be preserved, but his career and freedom were another matter entirely. He had breached multiple security protocols, threatened facility safety, and created a hostage situation. Even with mitigating circumstances, the consequences would be severe. Elena was still processing the complex mixture of emotions the crisis had evoked when the medical bay doors slid open to admit Director Catherine Sandoval, the facility's highest-ranking administrator. Her presence was unexpected. Sandoval typically delegated post-incident evaluations to department heads, rarely involving herself directly in operational matters. Dr. Vasquez, Sandoval acknowledged with a nod. I need a few minutes of your time once Dr. Navarro has cleared you. She's cleared medically, Navarro confirmed, closing Elena's file. Just needs to follow up next week for standard monitoring. Sandoval gestured toward the small conference room adjacent to the medical bay. Shall we? Elena followed, curious and slightly apprehensive. Her interactions with Director Sandoval had been limited and formal since joining Los Alamos, confined to large staff meetings and official announcements. The director's reputation was one of brilliant scientific mind combined with shrewd administrative skill, someone who balanced research ambitions against bureaucratic realities with remarkable effectiveness. The conference room was stark and utilitarian like most spaces in the facility, but Sandoval somehow managed to bring an air of authority to it, Simply by occupying a chair at the small table, she motioned for Elena to sit opposite her. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports on today's incident," Sandoval began without preamble. "Your actions prevented what could have been a significant radiation release event." "Dr. Morrison deserves equal credit," Elena replied. "His expertise with the specific containment system was crucial to our success." Sandoval's expression remained neutral. "Yes, the same Dr. Morrison who created the crisis in the first place." "With respect, Director, that's not entirely accurate," Elena countered carefully. "Dr. Morrison exposed a critical vulnerability in our storage protocols, one he had apparently tried to report through proper channels before his termination." "So I'm learning," Sandoval acknowledged, tapping a tablet in front of her. "I've spent the last few hours reviewing both Morrison's original reports and your safety assessments from the past 3 years. There's a concerning pattern of dismissed warnings." Elena hadn't expected this level of detailed review so quickly. "You've been thorough." "I've been negligent," Sandoval corrected sharply. "As facility director, the ultimate responsibility for safety protocols rests with me, even when I delegate day-to-day oversight. Today's events have made it abundantly clear that I delegated to the wrong people or failed to create systems where valid safety concerns could be properly evaluated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The frank acknowledgement of responsibility was refreshing after years of defensive deflection from department heads like Reynolds. Elena chose her next words carefully. "Systems are only as effective as the culture they operate within, Director. Los Alamos has developed a culture where raising safety concerns is seen as obstructionist rather than protective." "A culture I allowed to develop," Sandoval noted. "But cultures can change, Dr. Vasquez, when the right people are empowered to change them." She leaned forward slightly. "That's why I'm here. I need someone who understands both the technical aspects of our work and the safety imperatives it demands. Someone who has demonstrated the courage to stand by their assessments even when it's unpopular." Elena felt a surge of cautious optimism. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A complete restructuring of our safety and compliance division," Sandoval replied. "With you heading the effort as Chief of Nuclear Safety and Compliance, reporting directly to me rather than through department heads like Reynolds." The offer was unexpected and substantial, a significant promotion that would give Elena the authority she had lacked for 3 years. But she had learned to be cautious about promises made in the aftermath of crises. "That's a generous offer, Director, but I need to know if this is a genuine restructuring or a symbolic gesture to address today's incident. 3 years ago, I was reassigned to safety oversight because I raised concerns similar to Morrison's. I was technically promoted then too, but effectively sidelined." Sandoval's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm aware of your history, Dr. Vasquez. Your reassignment after the Nevada incident was politically expedient but scientifically indefensible. What I'm offering is not damage control. It's a fundamental realignment of how this facility approaches safety." To demonstrate her seriousness, Sandoval slid her tablet across the table. On the screen was an official directive already signed and time-stamped, detailing the new organizational structure with Elena's position clearly defined with broad authority and direct reporting lines. "Effective immediately," Sandoval added, "and announced facility-wide tomorrow morning." Elena studied the document, noting the carefully constructed language that gave her division review authority over all experimental protocols and storage procedures, the exact oversight that might have prevented today's crisis. "And Dr. Morrison?" she asked, looking up from the tablet. Sandoval sighed. "That's more complicated. Regardless of his motivations or the validity of his concerns, he created a dangerous situation that endangered personnel and secure materials. There will be consequences." "He also helped resolve that situation at personal risk," Elena pointed out. "His expertise was instrumental in preventing a major contamination event, which will be considered as mitigating factors," Sandoval acknowledged. "But I can't simply overlook the security breach. The best I can offer is to ensure his cooperation and technical assistance are recognized during whatever legal process follows." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but Elena recognized the constraints Sandoval was working within. Morrison had crossed lines that couldn't be entirely erased even if his underlying concerns were validated. "I understand," Elena said. And I accept the position with one condition. Sandoval raised an eyebrow. Which is a complete, independent review of all safety protocols and storage procedures facility-wide, not just in Sector 7. What happened today suggests systemic problems, not isolated failures. Granted, Sandoval agreed without hesitation. In fact, I would have been concerned if you hadn't requested exactly that. The comprehensive review will be your first priority in the new position. Their discussion continued for another hour, establishing parameters for the restructured division and immediate action items to address the most critical vulnerabilities. By the time they concluded, Elena felt a cautious optimism that had been absent for years. This was an opportunity not just for professional advancement, but for meaningful change in an institution whose work affected national security. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sandoval paused. One more thing, Dr. Vasquez. I understand you've maintained your expertise in nuclear materials handling and degradation modeling despite your reassignment. Your simulations of the W-88 container degradation were remarkably accurate. Elena nodded, wondering where this observation was leading. Your safety role is crucial, Sandoval continued. But I don't want your technical expertise confined to oversight alone. The facility needs both your caution and your innovation. We'll structure your new position to include research time as well as compliance duties. It was an unexpected acknowledgement of Elena's full capabilities, recognition that her value extended beyond pointing out others, mistakes to making substantive contributions of her own. Thank you, Director, Elena said simply. I appreciate that consideration. Sandoval smiled slightly. It's not consideration, Dr. Vasquez. It's common sense. Something apparently in short supply around here lately. I'll see you tomorrow morning for the announcement. After Sandoval departed, Elena remained in the conference room for a few moments, processing the dramatic shift in her professional trajectory. 3 years of dismissal and marginalization had suddenly transformed into a position of significant authority and renewed respect. The vindication was satisfying, but the responsibility was sobering. She gathered her thoughts and made her way through the medical bay, pausing at the observation window to Morrison's room. He was sitting up on the examination table, his expression distant and resigned as he stared at the wall. Elena tapped on the glass, catching his attention, and motioned to the security officer for permission to enter. The officer checked his instructions, then nodded. 5 minutes, Dr. Vasquez. Morrison looked up as she entered, surprise evident on his face. I didn't expect to see you again. Thought they'd keep us separated for the official narratives. Director Sandoval seems more interested in addressing the actual problems than constructing convenient narratives, Elena replied, taking the chair beside his bed. That would be a refreshing change, Morrison said, skepticism clear in his voice. What happens now? To the facility? A complete restructuring of safety protocols and compliance oversight. Elena paused. To you? Legal consequences, but with recognition of your technical assistance during the crisis. I've asked that your original safety reports be included in the official record as well. Morrison nodded slowly. It's more than I expected. He studied her carefully. And to you, what happens to La Cautelosa now? I've been appointed Chief of Nuclear Safety and Compliance, reporting directly to Sandoval. Elena couldn't keep a small note of satisfaction from her voice. With authority to review and approve all experimental protocols and storage procedures. A genuine smile crossed Morrison's face for the first time, so they finally realized that caution isn't a liability. It's essential when you're handling materials that can remain deadly for 10,000 years. His smile faded. I just wish it hadn't taken a crisis to make them see it. That's how change often happens, Elena observed. Not through gradual recognition, but through moments that make denial impossible. She leaned forward slightly. But once that door opens, what matters is what you do with the opportunity. And what will you do with it? Morrison asked. Exactly what I've been trying to do for 3 years. Make this facility as safe as it is innovative. But now with the authority to implement changes, not just recommend them. She rose to leave, aware of the security officer signaling that her time was up. Your work made this possible, Dr. Morrison. However, this ends for you personally. Know that it mattered. Morrison nodded, his expression a complex mixture of regret and satisfaction. Make them listen this time, Elena. Don't let them go back to business as usual once the crisis fades from memory. They won't have that option, Elena promised as she headed for the door. Not anymore. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the New Mexico sun casting long shadows across the facility grounds as personnel arrived for what many assumed would be a standard workday. Elena arrived early, using the quiet hours to begin drafting the comprehensive review protocols that would form the foundation of her new division's work. Director Sandoval's facility-wide announcement came at 9 a.m., delivered through the internal communication system with a directness that left no room for misinterpretation. The restructuring was presented not as a response to a single incident, but as a necessary evolution of the facility's approach to high-risk research. Yesterday's events demonstrated both a failure of our existing systems and the exceptional expertise of our personnel when properly empowered, Sandoval stated. Dr. Elena Vasquez exemplified the integration of technical knowledge and safety consciousness that must become standard throughout Los Alamos. As our new Chief of Nuclear Safety and Compliance, she will lead a comprehensive review of all protocols, with full authority to implement necessary changes. The announcement continued with specific details of the new organizational structure, including the direct reporting line to Sandoval that would prevent department heads from filtering or dismissing safety concerns. By the time it concluded, Elena could already see messages flowing into her new departmental account, some congratulatory, others wary, and many requesting immediate meetings to discuss ongoing projects. Among them was a message from Dr. Reynolds, its tone markedly different from their previous interactions. Dr. Vasquez, I owe you an apology for dismissing your concerns yesterday morning. Your assessment was correct, and your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic exposure event. I'd like to meet at your convenience to discuss how my department can better align with your new safety protocols. Reynolds Elena read the message twice, recognizing it for what it was. Not necessarily a change of heart, but an acknowledgement of the new power dynamics. Reynolds was pragmatic enough to recognize that her authority was now real, and that cooperation would serve him better than continued resistance. She scheduled the meeting for later that week, determined to establish a professional working relationship despite their history. The goal wasn't to punish past dismissals, but to create systems where expertise was respected regardless of departmental boundaries. As the day progressed, Elena moved through the facility with a new sense of purpose, stopping at each major research area to introduce herself in her new capacity and begin the process of building relationships based on mutual respect rather than regulatory enforcement. In Lab 7, where Project Hermes continued under modified protocols, she found Dr. Sophia Chen and her team already implementing enhanced monitoring systems that exceeded the minimum requirements. We've been reviewing your previous recommendations, Chen explained, showing Elena the new setup. Many of them make practical sense for our work, not just for compliance purposes. That's exactly the approach I'm hoping to encourage, Elena replied. Safety protocols work best when they're understood as enabling research rather than restricting it. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Yesterday was a wake-up call for many of us. Morrison's actions were extreme, but his concerns, and yours, were valid. Sometimes it takes a crisis to break through complacency. The challenge is maintaining that awareness once the immediate danger passes, Elena observed. Human nature tends to drift back toward convenience over caution. That's where systems and culture come in, Chen agreed. And leadership. She gave Elena a respectful nod. La Cautelosa doesn't seem so excessive now. By late afternoon, Elena had made her first official visit to each major department, establishing her presence and beginning the process of changing perceptions about safety's role in research excellence. The responses varied from enthusiastic cooperation to cautious acceptance, but nowhere did she encounter the dismissive attitude that had been so common just days before. Her final stop was Vault 16, now secured and under enhanced monitoring, while a specialized team examined all W-88 containers for similar degradation patterns. Miguel Herrera, the veteran technician who had once observed her working late in the simulation lab, was supervising the inspection process. Dr. Vasquez. He greeted her with genuine respect. Or should I say Chief Vasquez now? Elena is fine, Miguel, she replied with a smile. How's the inspection progressing? We've examined 8 containers so far, he reported. 2 are showing early signs of the same degradation pattern you identified in W8842. Not as advanced, but the same signature. Without your intervention, we would have had multiple incidents in the coming months. The confirmation of her concerns was sobering. Have you isolated the cause? Preliminary findings suggest exactly what you and Morrison theorized. Thermal stress from environmental control fluctuations, combined with a manufacturing variation in that particular production batch. The safety margins were smaller than the specifications indicated. Elena made notes on her tablet. We'll need to review all storage protocols for materials with similar containment systems, not just here but at all DOE facilities. Already started the data compilation, Herrera confirmed. Should have preliminary recommendations by end of week. As they walked through the vault, checking monitoring stations and inspection protocols, Elena reflected on how different this interaction felt from her previous visits to the secured storage areas. Before, she had been an unwelcome presence, tolerated but not respected. Now, her expertise was actively sought, her questions answered thoroughly rather than dismissively. You know, Herrera said as they completed their circuit, some of us always knew you were more than just a safety officer. The way you worked with those degradation models after hours, that was specialist-level analysis. Elena looked at him, surprised. You knew about that? He smiled slightly. Not much happens in this facility that the technical staff doesn't notice, Dr. Vasquez. We saw how they sidelined you after Nevada. Wasn't right, but wasn't our place to interfere with administrative decisions. And now? Elena asked. Now things are as they should be, he replied simply. The right expertise in the right position. What happened with Morrison was terrible, but maybe necessary. Sometimes systems don't change until they break catastrophically. They don't have to, Elena countered. That's the whole point of what we do, identifying weaknesses before they become failures. In materials, yes, Herrera agreed. In people and organizations, sometimes the warning signs get ignored until disaster is imminent. He gestured around the vault. But that's why your new position matters. Next time, the warnings will have authority behind them. As Elena left the secure area and made her way back to her new office, significantly larger and centrally located compared to her previous peripheral space, she considered Herrera's words. The technician had articulated something she'd been feeling since her conversation with Director Sandoval. Her new role wasn't just about implementing technical protocols, but about changing organizational culture. The office itself symbolized that change. Where before she had been physically marginalized, now she occupied a space that reflected her central importance to the facility's operations. The walls were lined with specialized monitoring displays showing real-time data from all research areas, and a large conference table occupied one corner for the team she would soon assemble. Elena sat at her desk, reviewing the draft announcement of the comprehensive safety review she would launch the following day. The document was careful in its language, emphasizing collaboration and shared responsibility rather than blame or regulatory enforcement. This wasn't about finding fault, but about building systems that made excellence inevitable, rather than occasional. A soft knock at her open door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Carlos Mendoza, Reynolds, deputy director and one of her most consistent critics over the past 3 years. Dr. Vasquez, he began, his usual confidence subdued. Do you have a moment? Of course, Elena replied, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. What can I do for you, Dr. Mendoza? He sat, with uncharacteristic hesitation. I wanted to speak with you directly rather than waiting for the departmental meeting. About yesterday and other things. Elena waited, giving him space to continue without prompting. I was wrong, he said finally, meeting her gaze with obvious effort. Not just about the container degradation, but about your assessments generally. I dismissed them as excessive caution without truly evaluating their technical merit. May I ask why? Elena inquired, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Mendoza considered the question seriously. Pride, primarily. I've been doing this work for 25 years. The suggestion that I might be overlooking critical safety factors felt like an indictment of my professional judgment. Quote, It wasn't intended that way, Elena assured him. I know that now, he acknowledged. But in the moment, it was easier to dismiss you as overly cautious than to reconsider established practices. He paused. Yesterday demonstrated the cost of that attitude in the most dramatic way possible. Elena recognized the genuine reflection in his words, not just a political adjustment to new power dynamics, but a real reassessment of his approach. "What matters is where we go from here," she offered. "The comprehensive review isn't about assigning blame for past decisions, but about creating better systems for future ones." "I'd like to be part of that," Mendoza said, surprising her. "My experience combined with your perspective could be valuable to the review process." It was an unexpected but welcome olive branch, one of the facility's most senior technical leaders volunteering to collaborate rather than resist the changes her new position represented. "I would welcome your participation," Elena agreed. "The goal has never been to impose safety at the expense of research excellence, but to ensure that excellence includes safety as an integral component." As Mendoza left, promising to send his preliminary thoughts on the review structure, Elena felt a sense of genuine progress. The crisis had created an opening, but it would take sustained effort to transform that opening into lasting change. She returned to her draft announcement, adding language about collaborative expertise and shared responsibility. The path forward wasn't about being right or proving others wrong. It was about creating systems where the best insights, whether cautious or innovative, could flourish together. Outside her window, the New Mexico sun was setting, casting long shadows across the facility grounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Resistance would inevitably emerge as the immediate impact of the crisis faded, and the hard work of systemic change would continue for months or years. But for the first time in 3 years, Elena Vasquez wasn't fighting alone against institutional inertia. She had authority, respect, and growing collaboration from colleagues who now recognized that caution wasn't the opposite of progress, it was its essential companion. La Cautelosa had become not a dismissive nickname, but a recognized strength. And in a facility dedicated to some of the world's most dangerous materials, that recognition might save not just careers, but lives. 6 months after the Vault 16 incident, Elena stood in the gleaming new Integrated Safety Systems Laboratory that occupied what had once been an underutilized storage area in the east wing of Los Alamos. The state-of-the-art facility represented the most visible manifestation of the changes she had implemented as Chief of Nuclear Safety and Compliance, but far from the most significant. Around her, a team of specialists, some safety experts, others researchers temporarily assigned to the division, worked at advanced simulation stations, developing and testing protocols that would be implemented throughout the Department of Energy's nuclear facilities nationwide. The laboratory hummed with purposeful energy, screens displaying complex degradation models and containment simulations that integrated safety considerations directly into research methodologies, rather than treating them as separate regulatory requirements. It was precisely the approach Elena had envisioned, safety not as an afterthought, but as a fundamental component of scientific excellence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Vasquez, call Dr. Sophia Chen from one of the simulation stations. We've completed the thermal stress modeling for the new X-series containment design. The results are surprising. Elena moved to Chen's station, studying the data with practiced expertise. The simulation showed potential failure points in what had been considered a breakthrough containment system, weaknesses that would only become apparent under specific conditions that might not emerge for years. "Has Reynolds seen this yet?" Elena asked, already calculating the implications for Project Hermes, which was scheduled to utilize the X-series containers in its next phase. "Not yet," Chen replied. "We just confirmed the results this morning. It's not catastrophic. The design can be modified to address the vulnerability, but it will delay implementation by at least 3 weeks. 6 months ago, such a delay would have triggered resistance, compromise attempts, and likely pressure to proceed with acceptable risk rationales." Today, Elena simply nodded and opened the facility messaging system on her tablet. "I'll inform him now and schedule a joint review session for tomorrow morning. His team should be involved in redesigning the containment system since they understand the materials better than anyone." Chen smiled slightly. "No battle expected?" "Collaboration, not combat," Elena replied, echoing the phrase that had become something of a mantra for her division. "Reynolds understands that addressing these issues early saves time and resources in the long run." It wasn't just a hopeful statement. It reflected the genuine transformation in how safety was viewed throughout Los Alamos. The comprehensive review Elena had launched immediately after taking her new position had identified dozens of potential vulnerabilities, similar to the one that had led to the Morrison incident. Rather than triggering defensive responses, the findings had been embraced as opportunities for improvement by department heads who now understood the consequences of dismissing such concerns. Reynolds, in particular, had undergone a remarkable evolution from skeptic to advocate. Whether motivated by genuine conversion or pragmatic recognition of the new reality, he had become one of Elena's most reliable allies in implementing changes that integrated safety seamlessly into research protocols. As Elena composed her message to Reynolds, she reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The initial goodwill generated by the crisis had inevitably faded. As she had anticipated, there had been resistance to some of her more sweeping changes, bureaucratic obstacles, and occasional backsliding into old patterns of prioritizing speed over safety. But the systems she had put in place, direct reporting lines, collaborative review processes, integrated safety research teams, had proven resilient. More importantly, the culture had begun to shift in ways that were difficult to measure, but impossible to miss. Safety was no longer viewed as an impediment to scientific progress, but as its necessary foundation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Message sent. Elena confirmed, returning her attention to Chen's simulation. Now show me the specific stress points you've identified. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with. For the next hour, they analyzed the data together, their complementary expertise. Chen's in materials science, Elena's in containment systems, creating insights neither could have developed alone. This was the essence of the approach Elena had championed, breaking down the artificial barriers between safety oversight and scientific innovation. We should bring in Mendoza as well, Chen suggested as they identified a potential solution. His work on polymer matrices might be applicable to reinforcing these vulnerable junctions. Elena agreed, sending another message to schedule an expanded review session. Collaboration had replaced competition as the default approach to problem-solving, with expertise valued regardless of departmental origin. As they wrapped up their analysis, Elena's secure tablet chimed with a priority notification. Director Sandoval was requesting her presence at a meeting with Department of Energy officials who had arrived for their scheduled 6-month review of the changes implemented after the Morrison incident. Duty calls, Elena told Chen with a smile. Can you prepare a simplified version of these findings for tomorrow's session? Something accessible to those without specialist knowledge of thermodynamics? Already working on it, Chen confirmed. Good luck with the bureaucrats. Elena made her way through the facility toward the administrative wing, acknowledging greetings from personnel in various departments as she passed. The respect in those interactions was no longer tentative or reluctant, but genuine, earned through consistent demonstration of her technical expertise and collaborative approach. Outside the main conference room, she found Miguel Herrera waiting with a tablet of his own, ready to provide technical support during the review meeting. His position had been formalized as Deputy Chief of Technical Implementation, recognizing the crucial role he had played in translating Elena's safety directives into practical applications throughout the facility. They arrived early, he informed her, nodding toward the conference room doors. Assistant Secretary Williams and his team have been with Sandoval for about 20 minutes. They're reviewing the quarterly metrics now. Elena nodded, taking a moment to organize her thoughts. These periodic reviews with DOE leadership were important milestones in institutionalizing the changes at Los Alamos. What had begun as crisis response needed to become standard operating procedure not just here, but throughout the nuclear research community. Any particular concerns I should be aware of? She asked Herrera, who had become her trusted right hand in implementing the new systems. Nothing significant, he replied. They seem especially interested in the statistical reduction in near-miss incidents and the integration of safety protocols into research design phases. Williams mentioned specifically that other facilities are looking to our model as a potential template. This was encouraging news. Elena's vision had always extended beyond Los Alamos to the broader nuclear research and storage network. The vulnerabilities they had identified here likely existed elsewhere, often unrecognized until crisis made them impossible to ignore. Let's not keep them waiting, she said, straightening her shoulders and adopting the quiet confidence that had become her professional trademark. Inside the conference room, Director Sandoval was mid-presentation with Assistant Secretary Williams and 3 DOE officials. The large display showed a graph of safety metrics before and after the implementation of Elena's integrated protocols, a dramatic visualization of the improvements achieved in just 6 months. "Ah, Dr. Vasquez," Sandoval acknowledged as Elena entered. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the remarkable efficiency gains your integrated approach has produced." Assistant Secretary Williams, a career administrator with a reputation for rigorous standards, studied Elena with evaluative interest. "Dr. Vasquez, your work here has attracted significant attention within the department. The Los Alamos model, as some are calling it, represents a potential paradigm shift in how we approach safety in high-risk research environments." Elena took her seat at the table, maintaining professional composure despite the satisfaction that came with such recognition. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Though I should emphasize that this isn't just my work but the result of facility-wide collaboration and Director Sandoval's leadership in prioritizing these changes." Williams nodded appreciatively at the acknowledgement but continued to focus on Elena. "Nevertheless, your approach, particularly the integration of safety specialists directly into research teams rather than maintaining them as separate oversight functions, has proven remarkably effective in both preventing incidents and accelerating research timelines." One of the other DOE officials, a severe-looking woman Elena recognized as Dr. Patricia Feldman, the department's chief of nuclear safety oversight, leaned forward with a more skeptical expression. "While the statistical improvements are impressive," Feldman noted, "I remain concerned about the potential for conflicts of interest when safety officers are embedded within the teams they're meant to be monitoring. Regulatory independence is a core principle of our oversight framework." It was a valid concern and one Elena had anticipated. The traditional model of safety oversight emphasized separation and independence precisely to prevent the kind of groupthink that could lead to compromised standards. "Your concern is well-founded, Dr. Feldman," Elena acknowledged, "which is why our model doesn't eliminate independent review, but enhances it with collaborative expertise. Safety specialists remain organizationally distinct, reporting through my division rather than to research directors. But they work alongside research teams from the earliest design phases, identifying potential issues before they're built into systems." She pulled up her own presentation on the conference room display, showing the organizational structure she had implemented. "The key innovation isn't eliminating independence, but eliminating adversarial relationships. When safety experts are seen as partners in achieving research excellence rather than obstacles to overcome, both safety and innovation improve." For the next hour, Elena walked the DOE officials through the specifics of the Los Alamos model, addressing concerns, highlighting successes, and acknowledging areas still needing refinement. Throughout the presentation, she emphasized that the approach wasn't revolutionary but evolutionary, building on best practices while addressing the psychological and organizational barriers that had often prevented those practices from being fully implemented. As the presentation concluded, Assistant Secretary Williams exchanged glances with his team before addressing Elena directly. "Dr. Vasquez, what you've accomplished here in 6 months is remarkable. The department is interested in expanding this approach to other facilities, beginning with Lawrence Livermore and Sandia National Laboratories." Elena had hoped for exactly this outcome but maintained professional restraint. "I believe the core principles would transfer effectively, though each facility would need to adapt the specifics to their unique research focus and organizational culture. Precisely why we need someone familiar with both the principles and their practical implementation to oversee that expansion," Williams continued. "The department is creating a new position, Deputy Director for Integrated Safety Systems, to coordinate this effort across all DOE nuclear research facilities. Director Sandoval has recommended you for the position." The offer was unexpected in its specifics, though Elena had sensed something significant in the wind. A department-level position would allow her to influence safety culture far beyond Los Alamos, potentially transforming how nuclear research was conducted throughout the national security apparatus. "That's a significant opportunity," she replied carefully. "And responsibility." "Indeed it is," Williams agreed. "You would be based in Washington, but with authority to implement changes across all relevant facilities. Your work here would serve as the template, with appropriate adaptations as you've noted." The conversation continued, detailing the scope of the proposed position and the timeline for implementation. By the time the meeting concluded, Elena had provisionally accepted the role pending final details, with a transition period that would allow her to ensure the Los Alamos systems were fully institutionalized before she departed. As the DOE officials filed out, Director Sandoval remained behind, watching Elena with a mixture of pride and what might have been wistfulness. "I knew this would happen eventually," she admitted. "You've outgrown us already." "Not outgrown," Elena corrected gently, "but perhaps ready to extend what we've built here to a broader context." Sandoval nodded. "The irony doesn't escape me, you know. 3 years ago, the system sidelined you for being right about safety concerns. Now you're being elevated to transform that same system because of those same principles. It's not about vindication," Elena reflected. "It's about the work itself, making nuclear research both innovative and safe by refusing to treat those goals as opposing forces." Nevertheless, Sandoval insisted with a small smile, there must be some satisfaction in the journey from La Cautelosa to deputy director. Elena couldn't deny it. Some, she acknowledged, but more satisfaction in knowing that the next safety specialist who raises uncomfortable concerns won't be dismissed as excessive or obstructionist. That's the real victory. As she left the conference room, Elena found herself reflecting on the unlikely path that had led to this moment. 5 years ago, her career had been derailed for doing exactly what her training and expertise demanded, identifying potential safety issues before they became actual disasters. She had been relegated to an oversight role intended to minimize her influence, given a nickname meant to diminish her credibility. Yet she had persisted, maintaining her technical expertise through after-hours work, documenting her concerns even when they were ignored, and remaining present in a system that often wished she would simply fade into bureaucratic obscurity. That persistence had positioned her to respond when crisis made her expertise undeniable. Now, as she walked through the corridors of Los Alamos toward her laboratory, she passed the very people who had once dismissed her concerns. Some, like Reynolds, had become allies in the new approach. Others had adapted more grudgingly but effectively to the changed expectations. All acknowledged her with respect that had been earned through consistent demonstration of both technical excellence and moral courage. In the Integrated Safety Systems Laboratory, her team was still working on the X-series containment issue, now joined by Carlos Mendoza, whose expertise in polymer matrices was proving valuable in addressing the vulnerability Chen had identified. They were so engrossed in their collaborative problem-solving that they barely noticed Elena's return. This, she realized, was perhaps her greatest achievement, not the promotion or the institutional recognition, but this fundamental shift in how safety and innovation related to each other. Instead of competing priorities, they had become integrated aspects of the same scientific excellence. Elena joined the team at the simulation station, contributing her insights to the developing solution. Tomorrow she would begin planning for her new role at the department level, but today she was still part of this team, still engaged in the detailed work of making nuclear research as safe as it was innovative. As the afternoon progressed, word of her impending promotion spread throughout the facility. Colleagues stopped by to offer congratulations, including some who had been her most vocal critics during her years as just a safety officer. Their respect now was genuine, if sometimes tinged with the awkwardness of those who recognized their past misjudgments. By evening, the team had developed a viable solution for the X-series containment issue, one that would require minimal redesign while addressing the thermal stress vulnerability comprehensively. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of solution that only emerged when different types of expertise were combined without hierarchical barriers. As the laboratory gradually emptied, Elena remained at her station, finalizing her notes on the day's developments. Through the large windows, she could see the New Mexico sunset painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, a daily spectacle she would miss when she relocated to Washington. Miguel Herrera approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, placing one beside her. "It's been quite a day." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. "That it has. Though I suspect tomorrow will be even busier." "The transition will be smooth," Herrera assured her. "What you've built here is solid, embedded in systems and culture, not dependent on any single person, even you." "That was always the goal," Elena acknowledged. "Institutional change, not personal influence." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunset deepen over the facility that had been the center of their professional lives. "You know," Herrera said finally, "when they first started calling you La Cautelosa, it was meant to marginalize you, but you transformed it into something powerful. A recognition that caution isn't timidity, but wisdom when the stakes are this high." Elena smiled slightly. "Names only have the power we give them. I chose to embrace it rather than resist it." "And now it's become a standard," Herrera noted. "I overheard Reynolds yesterday telling a new researcher that their approach needed to be more Cautelosa before he would approve it. He meant it as a compliment, the highest standard of both innovation and safety." The observation was deeply satisfying, evidence that the changes she had championed were becoming embedded in the vocabulary and thinking of the institution itself. What had begun as mockery had transformed into a benchmark for excellence. As darkness fell over Los Alamos, Elena completed her notes and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Planning her transition to Washington, selecting her successor to lead the division here, beginning the process of extending the integrated safety model to other facilities. The work would continue, expanding from this single facility to potentially transform how nuclear research was conducted throughout the national security infrastructure. The journey from sideline safety officer to departmental leader had been unlikely and unplanned, built on persistence rather than strategy. She had remained present when it would have been easier to leave, maintained her expertise when it was unrecognized, and stood by principles that others dismissed as excessive until crisis proved them essential. Walking through the now quiet facility toward the exit, Elena passed the small office she had occupied during her years as just a safety officer, the peripheral space that had symbolized her marginalized status. It was now occupied by a junior researcher, its location no longer a statement about organizational hierarchy but simply another workspace in an integrated team. Outside, the night air carried the crisp clarity particular to the high desert, stars emerging in a sky untouched by urban light pollution. Elena paused to appreciate the vastness above, a reminder of perspective that had sustained her through years of institutional resistance. The security guard at the checkpoint nodded respectfully as she signed out. "Congratulations on the promotion, Dr. Vasquez. Washington's lucky to get you." "Thank you, Joe," she replied with a genuine smile. "Though I'll miss the sunsets here." "They'll still be waiting whenever you visit," he assured her. "Some things don't change." But many things had changed, Elena reflected as she walked to her car. The culture that had once dismissed caution as an impediment to progress now recognized it as essential to sustainable innovation. The systems that had marginalized safety concerns now integrated them into the earliest stages of research design. The nickname that had been meant to diminish her had become a standard for excellence. Most importantly, the next specialist who identified potential vulnerabilities in nuclear storage or handling wouldn't face the institutional resistance that she and Morrison had encountered. They would be heard, their expertise valued, their concerns addressed before crisis made them undeniable. That was the true measure of the transformation, not her personal elevation, but the systematic changes that would outlast any individual career. As Elena drove away from Los Alamos National Laboratory for the penultimate time, she felt not the vindication of personal triumph, but the deeper satisfaction of meaningful impact. She had remained true to her expertise and principles when it was professionally costly, maintained her knowledge when it was unrecognized, and transformed excessive caution into essential wisdom through persistent demonstration of its value. The path ahead would bring new challenges at the departmental level, new resistance from entrenched interests, new opportunities to extend the integrated approach to facilities nationwide. But Elena Vasquez, once dismissed as merely La Cautelosa, was ready to meet those challenges with the same quiet determination that had transformed a crisis into an opportunity for systemic change. In the end, it wasn't about being right when others were wrong. It was about creating systems where being right mattered more than being convenient, where expertise was valued regardless of hierarchy, and where safety and innovation were recognized as complementary rather than competing priorities. That transformation, from adversarial oversight to collaborative excellence, would be her lasting legacy, far more significant than any personal advancement or institutional recognition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.